I stared at the text message on my phone, reading it 3 times before the words finally sank in. We need space this Christmas. Don't come. 23 years I'd been funding their perfect suburban life, and this was my holiday greeting. The mortgage I paid every month without fail, the one that kept them in that 4-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch, suddenly felt like a weight I could choose to put down. My daughter-in-law had sent it, not even my son David. The cinnamon-scented candle on my kitchen counter flickered as I set the phone down, my hand steadier than I expected. If you've ever been excluded from your own family's celebration, drop a comment with your city and subscribe, because this story gets complicated fast. The turkey I'd already bought sat in my freezer, a 15-pound reminder of traditions about to shatter. Outside my window, December snow fell in thick clumps, covering the driveway where David used to park his truck when he still visited regularly. That was before Jennifer, before the wedding 3 years ago that somehow turned my son into a stranger. I picked up the checkbook sitting on my desk, the one I used to write their mortgage payment every month. December 15th, like clockwork. This year, December 15th was tomorrow. My pen hovered over the blank check, but something stopped me from writing the numbers. $2,300, the same amount since they bought that house in 2019. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, each second giving me time to reconsider. But reconsider what, exactly? Funding my own exclusion? The house phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. My sister Ruth's number flashed on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to explain why I wouldn't be hosting Christmas dinner this year after all. The prime rib I'd ordered, the special napkins, the wine I'd been saving, all of it suddenly seemed ridiculous. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door hanging lights on her porch, her grandchildren running around the yard in puffy winter coats. Their laughter carried across the snowy lawn, a sound that used to fill my own home. Now my home was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I pulled out my laptop and opened my banking app, navigating to the scheduled payments screen. There it was, queued up for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Mortgage payment to First National Bank, account number ending in 7743, beneficiary David Michael Hartman and Jennifer Louise Hartman. My finger rested on the mouse, cursor hovering over the cancel button. The screen's blue glow reflected in my reading glasses, making everything feel surreal. One click. That's all it would take. One click to stop enabling people who couldn't even spare me a seat at their Christmas table. The cancel button seemed to pulse, waiting. I thought about all those years of sacrifice, working double shifts at the hospital so David could have a better life. The first payment I'd made on their house was supposed to be temporary, just until David's new job started providing better income. That was 4 years ago, when Jennifer was pregnant with Sophie, when they needed help with the down payment and the first few months of mortgage. Temporary became permanent, so gradually I barely noticed. Now Sophie was 3, and I hadn't seen her in 2 months. Jennifer's mother lived 10 minutes away and saw her granddaughter daily. I lived 35 minutes away and got occasional FaceTime calls when David remembered. The favoritism wasn't even subtle anymore. Last month, I'd sent Sophie a dollhouse for her birthday. Jennifer posted thank you photos to her mother's smaller gifts, but never acknowledged mine. My phone buzzed with a new message. Ruth again. Call me when you can. Something's going on with David. So she'd heard. Of course she had. Small families have no secrets, only delayed revelations. I typed back quickly. I'm fine. Just tired. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her response came. That's not what I asked. Typical Ruth, cutting through pretense like a surgeon's scalpel. We'd grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, sharing everything including our mother's limited attention after Dad left. She knew when I was avoiding something. The dots appeared again. I turned my phone face down on the counter before her next message could arrive. The thing about adult children is they forget you had a whole life before they existed. I'd been a cardiac nurse for 37 years, seen hundreds of families reconcile at bedsides, watched deathbed regrets play out in real time. The most common regret wasn't about money or careers, it was about time wasted on pride, on petty grievances that seemed important until they weren't. But this wasn't petty. This was exclusion, deliberate and cold. The text message didn't say, we're keeping it small this year, or we're starting new traditions. It said, "Don't come," like I was an unwanted solicitor, not the woman who'd given David life and Jennifer 4 years of financial support. I walked to the living room where my Christmas tree stood half-decorated, colored lights blinking on the bottom branches only. I'd run out of energy around the middle, leaving the top bare. Ornaments David had made in elementary school hung at eye level, construction paper angels with his gap-toothed smile, handprint reindeer dated 2003. 22 years ago, when he still needed me, when his world revolved around Pokemon cards and my approval. The angel on top of the tree, the one we'd bought together at the craft fair in 2015, remained in its box on the mantel. Putting it up alone felt too symbolic, too final. I sat on the couch, the leather creaking under my weight. The mortgage wasn't even the whole picture. There was the car insurance I'd paid for 2 years, the credit card I'd helped them pay off last summer, the groceries I'd bought during Jennifer's difficult pregnancy. I'd become their backup bank, their safety net, their solution to every financial inconvenience. And they'd become comfortable with it, entitled even. Last month, David had casually mentioned needing new tires, the way you'd mention the weather. The expectation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I'd written the check without him even asking directly. $647 for all-season Michelins. The receipt was probably still in his glove compartment, already forgotten. My daughter-in-law had never liked me, I could admit that now. The realization had come slowly, through 1,000 small cuts. The way she'd rearranged Sophie's playroom after I'd organized it during babysitting. How she'd redo Sophie's hair after I'd braided it, claiming it was too tight, even when it clearly wasn't. The comments about my cooking being too salty, or my gift choices being not quite right for Sophie's developmental stage. Jennifer worked part-time as a dental hygienist 3 days a week, yet somehow she was always too busy to bring Sophie by for visits. Her own mother, Karen, watched Sophie the other 4 days. Free childcare for Grandma Karen, scheduled visits for Grandma Me. Ruth called again. This time I answered, needing to hear a friendly voice. "What happened?" she asked immediately. No preamble. I told her about the text, about the casual dismissal, about the mortgage payment due tomorrow. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of her breathing and distant traffic on her end. She lived in Boston now, had for 15 years, but we talked weekly. "Don't pay it," she said finally, her voice firm. "Let them figure it out." I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised us both. "It's not that simple. Sophie lives there. David lives there." Ruth's response came quick and sharp. "And where do you live? In their backup plan?" After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on lamps. The Christmas tree lights provided enough glow to see by, casting red and green shadows across the walls. My ex-husband Tom would have had an opinion about this, probably would have told me to stop enabling David years ago. But Tom had been gone for 8 years, remarried to a woman in Florida who sent generic Christmas cards signed with her looping handwriting. He paid his court-ordered child support until David turned 18, then disappeared into his new life like our 20-year marriage had been a rehearsal for his real family. David had been 15 when we divorced, old enough to understand, young enough to blame me. I thought about Jennifer's parents, about the difference in how they operated. Karen and Bill had given David and Jennifer a generous wedding gift, $20,000 in a check presented at the rehearsal dinner, but they'd never paid a single monthly bill. They bought Sophie elaborate birthday presents and took family photos for their Christmas cards, but they didn't fund the mortgage. They maintained boundaries I'd somehow never established. During the wedding planning, Karen had said something that stuck with me. "We raised our daughter to be independent. Now we get to enjoy her as an equal." I'd smiled and nodded, not understanding then that she was drawing a line I'd never learned to draw. The next morning arrived with brutal sunshine, the kind of bright winter day that makes snow blindingly white. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the bank app open on my laptop. 8 a.m. approached with mechanical inevitability. 7:55, 7:57. At 7:59, my finger hovered over the cancel button again. The coffee had gone cold in my cup, untouched. Through the window, I watched Mr. Patterson scraping ice off his windshield, his breath creating small clouds in the freezing air. Normal people doing normal things on a normal Tuesday. Nothing about this felt normal. At 8 a.m. exactly, I clicked cancel. The payment status changed from pending to canceled. No fanfare, no warning messages, just a simple state change that would ripple through their lives like a stone through still water. My phone stayed silent all morning. I cleaned the house, scrubbing counters that were already clean, reorganizing cabinets that didn't need it. Nervous energy had to go somewhere. At 11:30, David called. I let it ring 4 times before answering, not wanting to seem too eager. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Did you forget the mortgage payment?" The question hung between us, loaded with assumption. Of course I'd forgotten. Forgetful old mom, getting scattered in her 60s. "No," I said simply, offering nothing else. Silence. Then, "What do you mean, no?" It didn't go through. I watched a cardinal land on my bird feeder outside, bright red against white snow. I canceled it. The explosion was immediate. "You what? Mom, that's due today. We're going to get hit with late fees." I kept my voice level, almost pleasant. "Then you should pay it yourself. You have jobs, you have income." David's breathing came harsh through the phone. "You can't just stop paying without warning. We budget around that money." The truth of it hit me then, clear and cold. They'd built their entire financial life around my contributions, treating my money like guaranteed income. "I gave you warning," I said quietly. "Yesterday, when Jennifer told me not to come for Christmas. That was my warning that our relationship had changed." Another silence, this one different, calculating. "That's what this is about? You're holding our mortgage hostage over Christmas?" I stood up, pacing my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear. "I'm not holding anything hostage, David. I'm simply stopping a gift I can no longer afford. Gifts go both ways. You give, you receive. Lately, I've been doing all the giving." He tried a different approach, his voice softening. "Mom, Jennifer's been stressed. Her mother suggested a quiet Christmas, just us. It wasn't personal. But it was personal, deeply personal, and we both knew it." "So her mother gets invited to the quiet Christmas?" The question landed like I knew it would. David hesitated too long before answering. "She's helping with Sophie." Of course she was. St. Karen, always there, always helpful, always welcomed. And I would help too if I were invited. But I'm not. So now you can have a quiet Christmas without my money too. David's tone shifted to anger. "This is manipulative. You're using money to control us." The accusation stung because it held a mirror up to something I didn't want to see. Was I being manipulative? Or was I finally setting a boundary after years of being used? "Control would be making demands," I said. "I'm making none. I'm simply stopping a voluntary payment. You're adults. You bought a house. You can pay for it." The silence that followed felt enormous. Finally, David spoke, his voice cold. "Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect things to go back to normal after this." I looked at my reflection in the microwave door, barely recognizing the woman staring back. "David, things haven't been normal for 3 years. I'm just finally acknowledging it." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table feeling oddly empty. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow sense of having crossed a bridge that was already burning behind me. The house felt too quiet. I turned on the radio, finding a station playing Christmas music, then immediately turned it off when "I'll Be Home for Christmas" started playing. The irony was too much. Instead, I called Ruth back. "I did it," I told her. "Canceled the payment." Her response was immediate and warm. "Good. How do you feel?" I considered the question seriously. "Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm waiting to see if I can fly or if I'll just hit the ground." Ruth laughed softly. "Maybe you'll do neither. Maybe you'll just land on solid ground for the first time in years." The rest of Tuesday passed in a blur of nervous energy. I went to the grocery store, returned the giant turkey, bought ingredients for a meal for one. The checkout clerk, a young woman named Maria, who always worked Tuesdays, asked about my Christmas plans. "Change of plans this year," I told her, keeping it vague. She nodded sympathetically, not prying. On the drive home, I passed their neighborhood, the one where David and Jennifer lived in that colonial I'd been funding. The streets were decorated with lights, inflatable Santas, the works. I wondered if they were home, if they were panicking about the mortgage, if they'd already called the bank. Part of me felt guilty. Most of me felt tired. Wednesday brought a new development. Jennifer called, which was rare enough to be notable. Her voice dripped with false sweetness, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Hi, Mom." She'd never called me Mom before, always Mrs. Hartman, or just avoiding titles altogether. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about Christmas." "Of course you're welcome." David must have explained it wrong. The lie was so transparent, I almost admired the audacity. "That's kind of you, Jennifer, but I've already made other plans." Not true, but she didn't need to know that. Her voice tightened. "What other plans?" The question revealed more than she intended. She couldn't imagine I had a life outside of waiting for their invitations. "Personal plans," I said vaguely. "Nothing that concerns you." The real reason for her call came tumbling out then. "Look, we really need that mortgage payment. The bank called. We're going to be late, and that affects our credit. Can we please just handle this like adults?" I felt my spine straighten. Adults pay their own mortgages, Jennifer. Adults who uninvite their mother-in-law from Christmas don't get to demand her financial support in the same breath. Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "So this is revenge? How mature." I counted to 5 before responding, a technique I'd learned in nursing school for dealing with difficult patients. "This isn't revenge. This is reality. I can't afford to pay your mortgage and mine. I'm 63 years old. I need to think about my retirement, my future. You and David need to do the same." Jennifer's mask dropped completely then. "You're being selfish. We have a child to think about. Your grandchild. Or doesn't Sophie matter to you?" The manipulation was textbook, using Sophie as a weapon. "Sophie matters tremendously," I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising in my chest. "Which is why I've sent gifts, money for her college fund, offered to babysit whenever you need. But you only call me for money, never for actual help with Sophie. Your mother watches her 4 days a week. I haven't seen her in person since October." Jennifer's silence told me the truth had landed. "That's not my fault," she said finally, defensive. "You live further away. 35 minutes versus 10. Not exactly across the country. Yet I'm close enough when you need money." The call ended badly, Jennifer hanging up after a tense exchange about family obligations and what grandmothers should do. I sat holding the dead phone, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into my bones. That evening, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door holding a plate of cookies. "Saw your lights were on late last night," she said kindly. "Everything okay?" I invited her in, grateful for the company. Over tea, I found myself telling her the whole story, words spilling out in a rush I couldn't control. She listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "My daughter did something similar 10 years ago," she said. "Cut me out, then came back when she needed money. I said no. Hardest thing I ever did." Mrs. Patterson's story gave me strength I didn't know I needed. She'd stood firm, set boundaries, and eventually her daughter had come around. Not for money, but for an actual relationship. "It took 2 years," she warned me. 2 years of silence, of missed birthdays, of wondering if I'd done the right thing. But now we talk every week. Real conversations, not just her asking for help. She sipped her tea, looking out my window at the snow. "The thing is, they don't respect what comes easy. My daughter respects me now because I respected myself enough to say no." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening darken outside. Before she left, Mrs. Patterson hugged me tight. "You're stronger than you think, dear, and you're not alone." Thursday morning, David showed up at my door unannounced. I was still in my bathrobe, coffee cup in hand, when the doorbell rang at 7:45 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see him pacing on my porch, his breath fogging in the cold air. I opened the door. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I stepped aside to let him in, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled clothes that suggested he'd been up all night. He went straight to my kitchen table and sat down heavily. "The bank said we have until Friday to pay, or they'll report us late. That affects everything, Mom. Our credit, our refinancing options, everything." I poured him coffee, buying time to organize my thoughts. "Then you need to pay it." David's frustration exploded. "With what money? Jennifer's hours got cut at the dental office. I'm barely covering the car payments and utilities. We've been relying on your help to make ends meet." The admission hung between us, raw and honest, in a way David hadn't been with me in years. I sat down across from him. Then you're living beyond your means. You need a cheaper house, or Jennifer needs full-time work, or you need a second job. What you can't do is build your life on my bank account. He looked at me like I was a stranger. When did you become so cold? The question hurt more than he knew, but I didn't let it show. I'm not cold. I'm just done being an ATM that never gets a thank you. We sat in painful silence, the kitchen clock ticking loudly. Finally, David spoke, his voice smaller. I'm sorry. About Christmas. Jennifer's mother has been pushing this idea that we should start our own traditions, without the older generation hovering. I should have said no. Should have told her you're always welcome. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd gotten, but it still wasn't quite there. I'm the older generation now? I asked quietly. David, I'm 63, not 93. I work full-time. I have a life. I'm not some doddering old woman you need to escape from. He had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't mean it like that, but he had meant it exactly like that, or at least Jennifer had, and he'd gone along with it. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Here's what's going to happen. I'm not paying your mortgage anymore. Not this month, not next month, not ever again. You're going to figure out your finances like adults. Maybe that means Jennifer works full-time. Maybe it means you sell that house and buy something smaller. Maybe it means you both get second jobs. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to do it without my money. David's face went pale. Mom, please. We can't lose the house. Sophie's school is in that district. The mention of Sophie was deliberate, another attempt to manipulate through guilt. Then fight for your house, get extra shifts, cut expenses, do what every other young family does when they're struggling. But stop expecting me to sacrifice my retirement so you can live in a neighborhood you can't afford. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine, you've made yourself clear. We'll manage without you. He headed for the door, then turned back. But don't expect to be part of Sophie's life. If you're not family enough to help us, you're not family enough to see her. The threat landed like a physical blow, stealing my breath. Before I could respond, he was gone, the front door slamming behind him. I stood frozen in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my cup, trying to process what had just happened. My son had just weaponized my granddaughter, turning her into a bargaining chip in a financial negotiation. The realization made me physically sick. I barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. After David left, I called Ruth, my hands still shaking. She answered on the first ring, and I told her everything through tears I couldn't control. He threatened to keep Sophie from you? Ruth's voice was ice. That's not just wrong. That's cruel. We talked for an hour, Ruth reminding me that David was angry and scared, that people say terrible things when they're cornered. But here's the thing, she said firmly. If you give in now, this pattern continues forever. He'll know exactly what button to push. You have to stand firm even if it kills you. I knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were entirely different things. What if I never see Sophie again? The question came out as a whisper. Then he's punishing his daughter too, Ruth said. And eventually he'll have to answer for that. Friday arrived, the deadline for their mortgage payment. I spent the day trying to distract myself with errands, cleaning, anything to avoid checking my phone every 5 minutes. At 2 p.m., my bank app sent a notification. They'd made a payment from their own account. $2,300, transferred directly to the bank. They'd done it. They'd found the money somehow, without me. I felt an odd mix of pride and sadness, like watching a child take their first steps away from you. Part of me wanted to call and congratulate David. Part of me knew the silence between us needed to hold a little longer. That evening, Mrs. Patterson invited me over for dinner. Her daughter was visiting from Connecticut, and I spent a pleasant evening hearing about their reconciliation, their rebuilt relationship, proof that standing firm could eventually lead somewhere good. The weekend passed quietly. No calls, no texts, just silence from David's end and careful check-ins from Ruth. I decorated the top of my Christmas tree, finally placing that angel where it belonged. It felt symbolic somehow, completing something I'd started, even if I was doing it alone. Sunday afternoon, I was baking cookies for the hospital staff, a tradition I'd maintained for 15 years, when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Hartman, This is Karen Mitchell, Jennifer's mother. My stomach dropped. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't good. I wanted to reach out, she continued, her voice surprisingly gentle, because I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding, and frankly, my daughter hasn't handled this well. Karen's call was unexpected in every way. She explained that she hadn't known about the Christmas uninvitation until yesterday, when Jennifer had mentioned it casually while complaining about their mortgage stress. I was horrified, Karen said. I told Jennifer that was completely unacceptable. You're Sophie's grandmother. You should absolutely be at Christmas. We talked for over an hour, and I learned that Karen had been pushing Jennifer to be more independent, not to exclude me. The quiet Christmas had been Karen's suggestion for Karen and Bill to step back, not for me to be pushed out. I'm so sorry, Karen said. I had no idea Jennifer would twist it this way. She's always been competitive with other women, even her own mother sometimes. But this is beyond the pale. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever had with Jennifer's mother. Karen shared something else too, something that reframed everything. Jennifer's hours weren't cut at the dental office. She quit. She decided she didn't want to work anymore, wanted to be a full-time mother like I was. But they can't afford that on David's salary alone. The revelation hit me hard. They weren't struggling due to circumstances beyond their control. Jennifer had made a choice, then expected me to fund it. Does David know? I asked. Karen sighed heavily. I think he does, but he's going along with it. My daughter can be very persuasive when she wants something. We ended the call with Karen promising to talk to Jennifer, to make it clear that excluding me wasn't acceptable. I appreciated the gesture, but wasn't sure how much it would help. Jennifer had already shown her hand. Monday brought another development. David called, his voice formal and stiff. Jennifer wants to apologize. Can we come over tonight? I agreed, curious to see what form this apology would take. They arrived at 6 p.m., Sophie in tow. My granddaughter ran to me immediately, wrapping her small arms around my legs. Grandma, I missed you. The simple joy in her voice made everything worthwhile. I scooped her up, breathing in her shampoo scent, feeling her warm weight in my arms. Over her head, I watched David and Jennifer exchange glances. Jennifer stepped forward, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I'm sorry for the confusion about Christmas. Of course you're invited. We want you there. The apology was as hollow as I'd expected, prompted by Karen's intervention and their mortgage scare, not genuine remorse. We sat in my living room, Sophie playing with the toys I kept in a basket for her visits, while the adults navigated the minefield of conversation. Jennifer explained, her voice saccharine, that she'd been stressed and not thinking clearly when she sent that text. David nodded along, supporting her narrative. I let them talk, watching their performance with detached interest. When they finished, I spoke calmly. I appreciate the apology, but I've made other plans for Christmas now. Jennifer's face fell, though I suspected it was more about losing their financial cushion than losing my company. What plans? David asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I'm going to Ruth's in Boston. She invited me, and I accepted. Not true yet, but it would be once I called her tonight. You're choosing Ruth over your own son? David's hurt sounded genuine this time. The question deserved a real answer. I'm choosing people who want me around, David. Ruth calls me weekly. She visits. She includes me in her life without me having to buy my way in. That's not choosing her over you. That's just choosing to spend my holiday where I'm actually welcome. Sophie looked up from her toys, sensing tension in adult voices. Jennifer moved to pick her up, but Sophie ran to me instead, climbing into my lap. Are you coming for Christmas, Grandma? I want you to see my new dollhouse. The one I'd bought for her birthday. The one Jennifer had never thanked me for. Not this year, sweetheart, I said gently, smoothing her hair. But maybe we can have our own special day, just you and me. Jennifer stood abruptly. We should go. It's past Sophie's dinner time. After they left, I called Ruth. How would you feel about hosting Christmas this year? I asked. Her delighted yes filled me with relief. We spent an hour planning, her excitement infectious. She'd invite her husband's family too, a house full of people who'd welcome me without conditions. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, feeling something shift inside me. The next morning, I woke to a text from David. The bank accepted our payment. We're going to make this work on our own. But we need to talk about boundaries, about what's fair to expect from you going forward. It was the most mature communication I'd gotten from him in years. Maybe the shock of having to stand on their own feet was already teaching them something valuable. Tuesday morning, I met Karen for coffee at a small cafe downtown. She'd suggested it, wanting to clear the air in person. Over lattes, she confided more about Jennifer's behavior, the entitlement that had worried her for years. "We gave her everything growing up," Karen said. "Maybe too much. She expects the world to work the way her daddy and I made it work, always catching her when she falls." It was an honest assessment, tinged with regret. We talked about grandparenting, about the delicate balance between helping and enabling. Karen had clearly been thinking about these issues too. "Bill and I have decided we're not doing regular childcare anymore," she said. "Jennifer needs to figure out daycare or go back to work. We've been part of the problem, making it too easy for her to avoid adult responsibilities." The conversation with Karen shifted something in me. If even Jennifer's own mother was recognizing the pattern of enablement and pulling back, I felt less alone in my decision. We made plans to coordinate, to present a united front of grandparents who loved our shared granddaughter but wouldn't be manipulated. "We should get Sophie together sometime," Karen suggested. "Not at their house, where Jennifer controls everything. Neutral territory, just us grandmothers, and Sophie." I loved the idea immediately. We picked a date, the Saturday before Christmas, for a Grandma's and Sophie Day at the Children's Museum. When Karen left, she hugged me tight. "I'm sorry my daughter made you the villain in her story. You deserve better." The validation meant more than she knew. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor. Sophie's preschool teacher, Miss Emily, called asking if we could meet. She'd gotten my number from the emergency contact list and apologized for reaching out directly. "I'm concerned about Sophie," she said carefully. "She's been saying her grandma died. I wanted to verify before addressing it with the class." My blood ran cold. Jennifer had told Sophie I was dead? Miss Emily quickly clarified. "Sophie said you were alive last week, so this is new." I think maybe she misunderstood something she overheard. We agreed to meet that afternoon. In her classroom, surrounded by tiny chairs and colorful posters, Miss Emily showed me a drawing Sophie had made. Dark scribbles, a figure labeled Grandma, with X's for eyes. She said you went away and aren't coming back. The meeting with Miss Emily crystallized everything. Sophie, at 3 years old, was being damaged by her parents' conflict with me. I couldn't control what David and Jennifer told her, but I could make sure she knew the truth. I asked Miss Emily if I could see Sophie briefly. She hesitated, then agreed, stepping out to get her from afternoon playtime. When Sophie saw me, her face lit up with confusion and joy. "Grandma, you're not gone!" She ran to me, and I held her tight, fighting tears. "I'm not gone, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'll always be here for you." Over Sophie's head, I saw Miss Emily's understanding expression. This wasn't the first time she'd seen family drama play out through a child. "Let's make a picture together," I suggested. Sophie and I drew flowers and rainbows, her chatter filling the quiet classroom. After leaving the preschool, I drove straight to David and Jennifer's house. Jennifer's car was in the driveway, and I marched up to the front door with purpose. She answered looking annoyed, probably expecting a delivery driver. Her expression shifted to alarm when she saw me. "What did you tell Sophie about me?" I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Jennifer's face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." But her eyes gave her away, darting to the side, her hands fidgeting. "Her teacher called me because Sophie drew a picture of her dead grandmother." "Want to explain that?" Jennifer's mouth opened and closed. She must have misunderstood. I said you weren't coming around anymore. The careful phrasing didn't hide the manipulation. To a 3-year-old, not coming around anymore sounded permanent, sounded like death. "You need to fix this," I said firmly. "You need to tell her the truth." Jennifer's defensive walls went up immediately. The truth? That her grandmother chose money over family? That she abandoned us when we needed help? The twisted logic was breathtaking. "I chose to stop funding your lifestyle," I corrected. "And I didn't abandon anyone. You uninvited me from Christmas, remember? You started this." Jennifer crossed her arms. "Because we knew you'd hold the money over our heads, make everything about what you've done for us." The projection was stunning. She'd held my access to Sophie over my head, but somehow I was the villain. "I'm going to see my granddaughter regularly," I said, my voice steel. You can facilitate that, or I can talk to a lawyer about grandparent rights. Your choice. The threat was real. Ohio had grandparent visitation laws, and I'd looked them up last night. The mention of lawyers changed Jennifer's demeanor instantly. That's not necessary. Of course you can see Sophie. But the words came through gritted teeth. Every Sunday afternoon, I specified. 2 to 5 p.m., I'll pick her up and bring her back. Jennifer started to protest, then seemed to think better of it. Fine. But David needs to agree too. As if on cue, David's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out, saw me standing at his door, and his shoulders slumped. What now? He asked tiredly. I explained about Sophie's drawing, about the lies she'd been told. David's face went pale, then red. He turned to Jennifer. You told her what? The fight that erupted between them wasn't my problem anymore. I'd said what I needed to say. I walked to my car with my head high. That evening David called. His voice was thick with emotion, maybe tears. I didn't know Jennifer said those things to Sophie. I swear, Mom, I didn't know. I believed him, actually. David had many faults, but deliberately traumatizing his daughter wasn't one of them. I'm not angry at you, I told him honestly. I'm angry at the situation, at how things got this bad. But we can fix it if you're willing. He was quiet for a moment. Sunday visits are fine. And Mom, I'm sorry, really sorry. Not just about Christmas or the mortgage, but about everything. I let Jennifer drive a wedge between us, and I shouldn't have. The apology felt genuine this time, not rehearsed or prompted. I love you, I said. That's never changed. But love doesn't mean I fund your life indefinitely. The week before Christmas passed in a blur of preparation. I booked my train ticket to Boston, packed my bags, wrapped presents for Ruth's family. Sunday came, and I picked up Sophie as agreed. Jennifer handed her over at the door without a word, but Sophie's excitement made up for her mother's coldness. We went to the zoo, had hot chocolate, talked about Christmas and reindeer and all the magical things 3-year-olds believe in. When I brought her back, Sophie hugged me goodbye and said clearly, "See you next Sunday, Grandma." Jennifer's tight smile told me she'd heard. The pattern was set. My granddaughter would know I was constant, present, choosing her even when her parents made it difficult. That was what mattered. Christmas Eve found me on a train to Boston, watching Ohio countryside give way to Pennsylvania hills. Ruth met me at the station with a huge hug and infectious enthusiasm. Her house was chaos in the best way, kids running everywhere, her husband's family loud and welcoming. They'd set up a guest room for me with fresh flowers and a stack of books by the bed. That night, we played games and sang carols, and I felt more at home than I had in years. Ruth's teenage daughter asked me to help make cookies at midnight, a tradition they'd started years ago. Standing in Ruth's kitchen, flour on my hands, laughter echoing around me, I realized I'd found exactly what I needed. Not replacement family, but authentic connection with people who wanted me there. Christmas morning in Boston was everything the holiday should be. Presents exchanged with thought and care, not obligation. Conversations that flowed naturally, without underlying tensions. Ruth's husband carved the turkey while making terrible jokes that had everyone groaning and laughing. Her mother-in-law, a sweet woman named Patricia, sat next to me and shared stories about her own children, the struggles of watching them grow up and away. The hardest part of being a mother, she said wisely, is accepting that you raise them to leave you. But the best part is when they choose to come back as friends. Not just because they need something. Her words resonated deeply. I wanted that with David, that friendship born of mutual respect, not financial dependency. Maybe someday we'd get there. Around 3 p.m., my phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I stepped into Ruth's quiet study to answer. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, and I could hear Sophie singing in the background. "Merry Christmas," I replied, meaning it. "How's your day?" He described their morning. Sophie's delight at her presence, the chaos of wrapping paper and new toys. Then his voice changed, became more serious. "Jennifer and I talked, really talked. We're going to marriage counseling in January, and we're putting the house on the market." The news surprised me. "You're selling?" He laughed, a sound without much humor. "We can't afford it without your help, and it's not fair to expect your help. We found a smaller place, 3 bedrooms instead of 4. The mortgage will be half what we're paying now. David's decision to downsize showed more maturity than I'd seen from him in years. "I'm proud of you," I told him honestly. That took courage. He was quiet for a moment. It took losing your support to realize how much we'd been living beyond our means. Jennifer's going back to work full-time in February. We found a good daycare for Sophie. We're going to do this right. Be actual adults instead of playing house with your money. The self-awareness was refreshing and painful at the same time. You were always adults, David. You just needed to believe it yourselves. We talked for 20 more minutes, and when we hung up, I felt lighter somehow. The relationship wasn't fixed, but it was healing. That was enough for now. Ruth found me in the study and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Good news? The day after Christmas, I took Ruth to lunch at a nice restaurant downtown, my treat. Over seafood and wine, we talked about everything and nothing, the way sisters do when they have time and space. You know what I realized? I told her. This whole situation, as painful as it's been, taught me something important. I'd been so focused on being needed that I forgot to insist on being wanted. There's a difference. Ruth nodded thoughtfully. Mom did that too, remember? After Dad left, she made herself indispensable to us. Like, if we needed her enough, we wouldn't leave like he did. The observation was accurate and sad. Our mother had spent years serving us, helping us, funding our early adult lives, terrified of abandonment. I'd inherited that fear without realizing it, but I was breaking the pattern now. New Year's Eve in Boston was quiet and perfect. Ruth's family went to bed early, exhausted from a week of festivities, but Ruth and I stayed up, watching the ball drop on TV, toasting with champagne at midnight. To new beginnings, Ruth said, raising her glass. To boundaries and self-respect, I added, and we clinked glasses, laughing. That night, tucked into Ruth's guest room, I made a list of resolutions. Not the usual lose weight, exercise more variety, but deeper commitments. I would value my time as much as my money. I would require reciprocity in my relationships. I would stop apologizing for having needs. I would teach Sophie, through example, how to be a woman who didn't shrink herself to fit others' expectations. The list felt like a declaration of independence, and I fell asleep feeling hopeful about the year ahead. I returned to Ohio on January 2nd, my house cold but welcoming. The Christmas tree was dry, needles falling when I brushed past it. I took it down that afternoon, packing away ornaments with care, including the ones David had made as a child. They went into storage, not trash. Someday, maybe, I'd pass them on to Sophie. The house felt different now, less like a waiting room where I marked time between family visits and more like an actual home. I rearranged furniture, painted my bedroom a color I'd always wanted, bought new curtains. Small changes that declared this space was mine, designed for my comfort, not just to accommodate occasional guests. Mrs. Patterson came over to admire the changes and brought news. Her daughter was pregnant, making her a grandmother again. The joy in her voice made me smile. Sunday came, and I picked up Sophie for our weekly visit. Jennifer was marginally more polite this time, actually saying hello and asking about my trip to Boston. Progress, however small. Sophie and I went to the library, picked out books, then came back to my house for lunch. She loved the newly painted bedroom, declaring it princess colors. We made sandwiches together, her small hands carefully spreading peanut butter, and I taught her how to cut shapes with cookie cutters. While we ate, she chattered about preschool, about her friends, about the new house they were going to move to. It has a smaller yard, she said matter-of-factly. But Daddy says smaller is better because we can take care of it ourselves. The phrase sounded rehearsed, something David had repeated until Sophie memorized it. But the principle was sound. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Work at the hospital, weekly dinners with Mrs. Patterson, Sunday visits with Sophie, phone calls with Ruth and David. The mortgage situation resolved itself when David and Jennifer sold their house in early February, making a small profit that covered their moving costs to the more modest home. David called to give me the news, his voice lighter than I'd heard it in months. "We closed today. The new place is perfect, Mom. You should come see it." I agreed, curious about this house they'd chosen themselves, that they could actually afford. When I visited the following Sunday, I was pleasantly surprised. A cozy ranch with a fenced yard, updated kitchen, smaller but well-designed. "This feels like you," I told David, and meant it. It felt like a home they'd made, not one they were performing in. Jennifer was different in the new house, too. Less defensive, more genuine. She showed me around with something approaching pride, pointing out the features she loved. "We can actually afford this," she said simply. "It feels good, not being stressed about money every month." I nodded, understanding the relief of living within your means. That afternoon, the four of us, 3 adults and Sophie, sat in their living room drinking coffee while Sophie played nearby. "I want to apologize," Jennifer said suddenly. "Not just for Christmas, but for everything. I treated you like a bank instead of a person. My mother called me out on it, said I was acting entitled and spoiled. She was right. The apology was awkward but sincere." "I accept your apology," I said carefully. "And I apologize too for enabling it so long. We both made mistakes." The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had. Jennifer explained her fears about money, about not being good enough, about competing with Karen for the role of perfect mother and grandmother. David talked about feeling caught between his wife and his mother, trying to please everyone and pleasing no one. I shared my own struggles, the loneliness of funding a relationship rather than enjoying one, the fear that without money I had nothing to offer. We all cried a little, laughed a little, and by the end, something had shifted. Not fixed completely, but shifted towards something healthier. "Can we start over?" Jennifer asked. "Not forget what happened, but move forward differently?" I considered the question. "I'd like that," I said finally, "but with clear boundaries this time. I'm not funding your lives. I'm your mother and mother-in-law, not your retirement plan." March brought Sophie's 4th birthday. They invited me to help plan it, actually asking for my input rather than just my money. We decided on a small party at a local park, weather permitting. I offered to make the cake, my specialty chocolate with raspberry filling. Jennifer accepted gracefully, even asking for the recipe. The party was simple and joyful. A dozen preschoolers running wild, parents chatting in small groups. Karen and Bill were there too, and the 4 grandparents worked together easily, a united team rather than competing factions. When Sophie blew out her candles, she made a wish out loud, as 4-year-olds do. "I wish for all my grandmas and grandpas to be at every birthday forever." The adults exchanged glances, smiling. That was a wish we could make come true. In April, David called with news. Jennifer's pregnant, due in November. My first thought was worry about their finances, but I bit my tongue. "Congratulations," I said instead. "How are you feeling about it?" David laughed. "Terrified and excited. We planned this one actually, saved up for it. We'll be tight financially, but we can manage. Jennifer's taking maternity leave but going back to work after 3 months." The responsibility in his voice made me proud. They were planning, budgeting, being actual adults. "I'm happy for you," I told him honestly. "Sophie will be a great big sister." We talked about names and nursery colors, the normal excited chatter of impending grandparenthood. This time, I was being included from the beginning, not just as a checkbook, but as family. Mother's Day arrived sunny and warm. Sophie and David showed up at my door at 9 a.m., Sophie holding a card she'd made herself. "We're taking you to brunch," David announced. "Our treat. And before you argue, we budgeted for it." Jennifer had stayed home, morning sickness making the thought of restaurant food unbearable, but she'd sent flowers that arrived the day before. At brunch, Sophie sat in a booster seat between us, chattering happily while David and I talked. "I never thanked you properly," he said quietly, while Sophie was distracted by crayons. "For everything you did for us, for years, and for stopping when we needed you to stop. That sounds weird, but it's true. We needed that wake-up call." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You don't need to thank me for loving you, David. That's just what I do." Summer passed in a pleasant blur. Weekly Sophie visits continued, now sometimes including Jennifer and casual dinners. I started a garden in my backyard, something I'd always wanted but never had time for. Tomatoes and basil, zucchini and peppers. Mrs. Patterson helped me plan it, sharing seedlings from her own abundant garden. Ruth visited in July, staying a week, and met Sophie for the first time. They took to each other immediately, Sophie delighted by her great-aunt's goofy sense of humor. One evening, after Sophie had gone home, Ruth and I sat on my new patio furniture, drinking wine and watching fireflies. You seem happy, Ruth observed. Really happy, not just making the best of things. I considered that. I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm living my life instead of funding someone else's. August brought the gender reveal for the new baby. A boy. They were having a boy. Sophie was thrilled at the prospect of a baby brother. They'd chosen a name, James, after David's grandfather. The family was expanding, relationships were healing, and I was part of it all without sacrificing myself in the process. David and Jennifer asked if I'd be in the delivery room, and I agreed, honored by the trust. We want you there, Jennifer said simply. Your family, the real kind, not just DNA. The words meant everything. In September, they threw a small baby shower, and I sat with Karen, the two grandmothers-to-be, talking about our shared grandchildren, our hopes for them, our commitment to being present without being overbearing. We'd both learned hard lessons about enabling versus supporting. James arrived on November 15th, a healthy 8-pound baby with David's nose and lungs that worked impressively well. I was there for the birth, holding Jennifer's hand while she pushed, crying when they placed that tiny human on her chest. Sophie met her brother the next day, gentle and curious, already protective. He's so small, Grandma, she whispered, touching his tiny hand. Was I that small? I assured her she was, pulling out my phone to show her newborn photos from 4 years ago. The circle of life, continuing, expanding. I held James while Jennifer rested, breathing in that incomparable new baby smell, feeling the weight of him in my arms. This grandchild I'd be part of raising right, with boundaries and love in proper balance. Thanksgiving at David and Jennifer's new house was everything the previous Christmas hadn't been. The whole family gathered around their modest dining table, extended with a card table to fit everyone. Karen and Bill, Ruth, who'd driven down from Boston, Mrs. Patterson, who'd become like family. Sophie helped set the table. James slept in a bassinet nearby, and the house smelled like turkey and pie and home. Before we ate, David stood, tapping his glass for attention. I want to make a toast, he said, his voice thick with emotion. To family, the kind you're born into and the kind you choose. To second chances and hard lessons, and especially to Mom, who loved us enough to let us fall and then helped us learn to stand. Everyone raised their glasses, and I blinked back tears. Christmas that year was split between families, a fair arrangement we'd all agreed on. Christmas Eve at my house, Christmas Day at David and Jennifer's, both celebrations including everyone. On Christmas Eve, I hosted for the first time in 2 years. My tree was fully decorated, presents piled underneath, my house filled with laughter and love. Sophie helped me frost cookies while James napped upstairs, his baby monitor crackling with the white noise machine Jennifer swore by. Karen and I worked together in the kitchen, a partnership that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Thank you, she said quietly while we were alone, for standing firm. Jennifer needed that wake-up call, and I wasn't strong enough to give it to her. You did what I couldn't. I hugged her, understanding the guilt of a mother who'd enabled her child's worst impulses. The evening was magical, exactly what I'd hoped for last year but couldn't have imagined achieving. We sang carols, told stories, watched Sophie's eyes grow wide as we talked about Santa's imminent arrival. At bedtime, she insisted I read her night-night story, choosing a book about a grandmother and granddaughter. As I read, her eyes grew heavy, and she whispered, I love you, Grandma, forever and ever. My heart felt so full it might burst. After she slept, the adults sat around the tree, drinking wine and talking quietly. David sat next to me on the couch. This is what Christmas should be, he said softly. Family together because they want to be, not because they have to be or because someone's paying for it. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Christmas morning at David's house was controlled chaos, wrapping paper everywhere, Sophie's delighted shrieks as she discovered what Santa had brought. James, now 6 weeks old, slept through most of it, waking only to eat and then dozing off again. I'd bought thoughtful presents within my budget, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed of trying to buy love. For Sophie, art supplies and books. For James, a handmade quilt I'd spent months sewing. For David and Jennifer, a framed photo of all 4 generations, me and Ruth, David and Jennifer, Sophie and James. Jennifer cried when she opened it. "This is perfect," she whispered. "This is us. Really us." The gift I'd given myself was the ability to be present in the moment, not worrying about money or expectations or whether I was doing enough. January brought new beginnings and old rhythms. Back to work at the hospital, back to weekly Sophie visits now, including baby James, back to Sunday dinners and book club and the garden planning for spring. But everything felt different, lighter somehow. I'd reclaimed my life, set boundaries, and discovered that being valued was so much better than being needed. David and Jennifer were thriving in their modest home, managing their finances, parenting their children, building a life they could sustain without my constant financial intervention. Our relationship had been reborn on a foundation of mutual respect rather than monetary dependence. When David called now, it was to chat, to share news, to ask advice about parenting, not to request money. The difference was everything. February brought Sophie's first sleepover at my house. Just her and me, a grandmother-granddaughter adventure. We made pizza from scratch, watched her favorite movie, built a blanket fort in the living room where we slept surrounded by stuffed animals. In the quiet dark, she asked, "Grandma, why didn't you come for Christmas that one time?" I'd known this question would come eventually. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," I told her honestly. "Your mommy and daddy and I had to figure some things out, but we fixed it, and now everything's better." She considered this. "Like when me and Emma fight at school but then we're friends again?" "Exactly like that, sweet girl. Exactly like that," I confirmed. She snuggled closer. "I'm glad you fixed it. I need you, Grandma." The words pierced my heart. I need you too, Sophie. Always. March brought an unexpected opportunity. The hospital offered an early retirement package, generous enough to make it feasible. I was 64, eligible for Social Security in a year, had savings that could bridge the gap. The idea of retirement had seemed impossible when I was funding David's mortgage. But now, with my finances solely my own, it was actually achievable. I talked it over with Ruth, with Mrs. Patterson, with Karen even. Everyone encouraged me to take it. "You've worked hard your whole life," Ruth said. "You deserve to enjoy yourself." I thought about what retirement might look like. More time with grandchildren, travel I'd always postponed, maybe volunteering, definitely more time for my garden. The prospect was exciting rather than frightening. I accepted the package. My retirement party in April was bittersweet. 37 years in cardiac nursing, countless lives touched, relationships built. My colleagues had become family, the hospital a second home, but it was time. David and Jennifer came to the party, bringing both kids. Sophie, now 4.5, charmed everyone. James, 5 months old, smiled his gummy smile at anyone who'd hold him. My supervisor gave a speech about my dedication, my compassion, my skill. When it was my turn to speak, I thanked everyone, but also acknowledged the journey of the past year. "I learned something important recently," I told the room. "Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup. Thank you for filling my cup for 37 years. The applause was thunderous. Retirement suited me better than I'd expected. I volunteered at the Children's Hospital once a week, reading to young patients. I took a watercolor class at the community center. I traveled to visit Ruth in Boston, took a trip to the Grand Canyon I'd always dreamed about, and I spent time with my grandchildren, real quality time, without the resentment of wondering if I was buying their affection. Sophie and I had adventures, trips to the zoo and museums and parks. James grew from infant to baby to toddler, and I was there for every milestone. David and Jennifer continued to thrive. Jennifer getting promoted at the dental office, David starting a side business doing handyman work. They were proud of what they'd built together, and I was proud of them. Summer brought Sophie's 5th birthday and kindergarten registration. She was growing up so fast, this little person with opinions and personality and endless questions. At her birthday party, she insisted on introducing me to all her friends. "This is my grandma," she'd say proudly. "She's the best." Simple words that meant the world. Karen caught my eye across the park pavilion and smiled. We'd both earned those introductions, those declarations of love, by being present and consistent and putting the children first. Later, When the party wound down and kids were picked up by parents, Sophie climbed into my lap. "Grandma, will you always come to my birthdays?" "Always, baby girl. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." "Always," I promised. That's what grandmas do. The second Christmas after our big conflict was everything the first one should have been, but better because we'd all grown. Christmas Eve at my house had become tradition, Christmas Day at David's. This year, Ruth brought a new boyfriend, a widower she'd met at work. Mrs. Patterson came with her daughter and new grandson. Karen and Bill brought their famous eggnog. The house overflowed with people and laughter and love. Sophie, now 5, helped me bake cookies with the confidence of a seasoned baker. James, 1 year old, toddled around getting into everything, his laugh like music. As I watched my family, chosen and biological, filling my home with joy, I thought about that text message from 2 years ago. "We need space. Don't come." It had felt like the end of everything, but it had actually been a beginning. Standing in my kitchen, watching Sophie carefully place sprinkles on cookies while Jennifer supervised James's enthusiastic helping, I caught David's eye. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, and mouthed, "Thank you." I shook my head slightly. Nothing to thank me for. This was just love, finally expressed in healthy ways. The turkey timer went off, and Karen helped me pull the bird from the oven. "Perfect," she declared. "Just like everything else about today." We carried platters to the dining room where the table was set with my good china, the plates that had survived my divorce, my years of single parenting, my journey to this moment. Everyone gathered, finding their seats, passing dishes, filling plates. And when David stood to make his annual toast, I knew whatever he said would be exactly right. "To family," David said, raising his glass. "To the people who love us enough to be honest, even when it's hard. To second chances and new beginnings. To my mother, who taught me that real love sometimes means tough love, and that enabling isn't kindness." He paused, emotional. 2 years ago, I didn't understand why you stopped paying our mortgage. I thought you were being cruel. Now I understand you were being kind in the most important way. You believed we could stand on our own, even when we didn't believe it ourselves. You were right, Jennifer added. And you taught me that family isn't about what you can do for each other financially. It's about showing up, being present, choosing each other every day. Glasses clinked around the table, and I wiped away happy tears. After dinner, while others cleaned up, I slipped outside to my porch with a cup of coffee. The December air was cold, but not unbearable, the sky clear and full of stars. I thought about the keys I'd metaphorically laid on the table 2 years ago, the choice to stop funding their life. That choice had seemed so hard, so painful, potentially relationship ending. But it had actually saved our relationship, forcing everyone to grow up, to value each other properly. The front door opened, and Ruth joined me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. "You did good, sis," she said quietly. "You did real good." We sat in comfortable silence, sisters who'd survived their own difficult childhood, who understood that love sometimes meant stepping back, letting people find their own way. Sophie burst through the door, breaking our quiet moment. "Grandma, Daddy says it's time for presents." Her excitement was infectious, pulling me back inside to the warmth and chaos. The living room was crowded, everyone finding spots on furniture or floor. Presents were distributed, the pile under the tree shrinking as wrapped packages found their recipients. Sophie opened hers with methodical care, saving the paper. James ripped into his with toddler enthusiasm, more interested in boxes than contents. When it was my turn, David handed me a small package, nervously watching my face. Inside was a framed photo, one I'd never seen before. David and Jennifer's first mortgage payment on their new house, the check made out in David's handwriting, no contribution from me. Below it, a plaque read, "The first of many. Thank you for believing we could. Love, David, Jennifer, Sophie, and James." The gift broke something open in me, happy tears I couldn't control. Around the room, everyone else was crying too, understanding the significance. This wasn't just a framed check. It was proof of independence earned, of lessons learned, of a family healed. "I'm going to hang this in my bedroom," I managed to say through tears. right where I can see it every morning. David hugged me, and I felt his shoulders shake with his own emotion. We couldn't have done it without you stopping, he whispered. That's the paradox, isn't it? We needed you to step back so we could step up. Jennifer joined the hug. Then Sophie wormed her way in, and finally someone lifted James to complete the circle. 5 people, 3 generations, held together by love that had been tested and proven strong. The evening wound down slowly, reluctantly. Ruth and her boyfriend left first, then Mrs. Patterson with her family, then Karen and Bill. Each departure involved long hugs, promises to see each other soon, genuine affection. Finally, it was just David's family and me. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, James drowsing in his mother's arms. We should get these kids home, Jennifer said softly. David gathered Sophie gently, and I walked them to the door. Same time tomorrow? Jennifer asked. Noon at our place? I confirmed the plans, kissed Sophie's sleeping head, touched James's soft hair. As they walked to their car, I stood in my doorway watching, my heart full. This was what I'd fought for, what I'd risked everything to achieve. Real relationship, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not financial obligation. I cleaned up slowly, savoring the quiet after the celebration. Dishes washed and put away, leftovers stored, furniture returned to its usual places. The house felt lived in, loved in, exactly as a home should. In my bedroom, I found the perfect spot for David's gift, right on my dresser where I'd see it each morning. The framed check, proof that letting go had been the right choice. I thought about that woman 2 years ago, the one who'd stared at a text message feeling betrayed and hurt. I wished I could tell her it would all work out, that the pain would lead to something better. But maybe she'd needed to walk through that pain to get here. Maybe we all had. I got ready for bed, exhausted but deeply content. Christmas Day at David and Jennifer's new house was more intimate, just the immediate family. We opened presents in pajamas, ate cinnamon rolls Jennifer had made from scratch, watched Sophie help James open his gifts. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, exactly how Christmas should smell. Around noon, we started cooking dinner together, all 3 adults working in the kitchen while the kids played. It felt easy, natural, the way family should feel. Jennifer taught me her recipe for sweet potato casserole. I showed her my trick for perfect gravy. David managed the turkey with confidence. We worked together, talking and laughing, and I realized this was what I'd wanted all along. Not to be needed for money, but to be included for myself. Dinner was delicious, the conversation flowing easily. Sophie, at 5, was old enough to really participate now, sharing stories from kindergarten, asking questions about when her daddy was little. James, in his high chair, made a glorious mess of mashed potatoes, his laughter making everyone smile. After dinner, we played board games, Sophie winning Candyland with suspicious frequency. When it was time for me to leave, the goodbyes were warm but easy. See you Sunday, Sophie said. Our weekly visit so routine she didn't question it. Love you, Grandma. I drove home through quiet streets, Christmas lights twinkling in windows, feeling profoundly grateful. The journey had been hard, but the destination was worth every difficult step. My family was whole again, healthier and stronger than before. The weeks after Christmas brought a return to routine, but routine felt good now, stable and secure. Weekly Sophie and James visits, occasional dinners with David and Jennifer, my volunteer work at the hospital, my art class, my garden planning for spring. Life had a rhythm that felt sustainable, joyful even. In late January, David called with news. We're going to start paying you back, he announced. For all those years of mortgage payments, we calculated it out and we want to repay you. I was quiet for a moment, considering. That's not necessary, I said finally. That money was a gift given freely. David persisted. We know it was a gift, but we want to do this. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Please, Mom, let us do this. I heard the pride in his voice, the need to make amends in a tangible way. We compromised. They'd pay me back slowly, an amount they could afford without strain, money I'd put directly into a college fund for Sophie and James. Everyone won. The kids got their education funded, David and Jennifer got to repay their debt and rebuild their pride, and I got the satisfaction of knowing my money would help my grandchildren in a healthy way. The first check arrived in February, made out carefully in David's handwriting. $100, with a note. First of many. Thank you for everything. Love, David. I deposited it into the college fund account I'd opened, watching the balance change from $0 to $100. It would grow slowly over the years, but it would grow, just like my family had grown, slowly and sometimes painfully, into something real and lasting. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal. My garden flourished under careful tending, tomatoes and peppers and herbs filling raised beds. Sophie helped me plant seeds, her small fingers pressing them into soil, watering carefully with her child-sized watering can. James toddled around the garden, more interested in eating dirt than planting. But that was okay too. These were the moments I'd almost lost. The simple joy of being with my grandchildren without resentment or obligation clouding everything. Mrs. Patterson came over often, the two of us working in adjacent gardens, sharing plants and conversation. Your family came back to you, she observed one sunny afternoon. I knew they would. I smiled, hands deep in rich soil. We came back to each other, I corrected. That's more accurate. May brought Mother's Day again, the second one since our reconciliation. This time, the whole family came to my house for brunch, David insisting on cooking. He'd been practicing, he said, wanting to do something special. Jennifer brought flowers from their garden, roses she'd grown herself. Sophie presented a card she'd made at school, covered in glitter and heartfelt scribbles. To the best grandma in the world, it read in her careful kindergarten handwriting. James, now walking confidently, brought me dandelions from my yard, weeds he thought were flowers. I accepted them like they were roses, putting them in a small vase on my kitchen table. These were treasures, every single one. Brunch was perfect, not because the food was fancy, but because we were together, relaxed and happy, choosing each other's company freely. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that devastating text message to this moment of peace, I understood something fundamental. The best gift I'd ever given my son wasn't money. It was boundaries. By refusing to continue funding their unsustainable lifestyle, I'd forced them to grow up, to take responsibility, to build something real. And in the process, I'd reclaimed my own life, my own identity, beyond being a checkbook with a pulse. The mortgage I'd stopped paying had been the key to everything, the symbolic turning point that changed all our lives. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone struggle, knowing they'll emerge stronger. That's what real love looks like, not the enabling I'd mistaken for affection all those years. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments I'd doubted myself, wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, feared I'd lost my family forever. But standing in my kitchen on Mother's Day, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there, I knew every painful step had been necessary. David and Jennifer had learned to value what they earned rather than what was given. Sophie and James would grow up seeing healthy family dynamics, boundaries respected, love freely given rather than purchased. And I had learned that being wanted was infinitely better than being needed, that self-respect mattered more than keeping the peace at any cost. The price of admission to my life was no longer financial. It was genuine affection and reciprocal effort. As the afternoon sun streamed through my kitchen windows, illuminating the faces of my family, I felt a profound sense of completion. The circle had closed, the lesson learned, the relationship rebuilt on solid ground. Sophie was laughing at something her father said. James was attempting to steal cookies from the counter. Jennifer was helping me clear dishes with easy familiarity. These weren't people performing gratitude for financial support. These were people who loved me, who showed up because they wanted to, who valued my presence beyond my bank account. The transformation had taken 2 years, countless difficult conversations, moments of pain and doubt and fear. But here we were, on the other side, better and stronger and more authentic than we'd ever been before. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The same porch where I'd sat 2 years ago, devastated by a text message, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. The same house, but everything was different now. I was different. stronger, clearer about my worth, more confident in my decisions. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Thank you for today, Mom. Thank you for everything, but especially for loving us enough to let us fall. We're better people because of it. Love you." I typed back simply, "Love you too. Always have, always will." And I meant it, with every fiber of my being, this love that had been tested and refined and proven true. The keys I'd laid on the table that Christmas, metaphorical and powerful, had unlocked something far more valuable than I'd imagined. Not just their independence, but my own freedom. Freedom from the burden of funding other people's dreams while neglecting my own. Freedom from the fear that without money, I had nothing to offer. Freedom to be myself, flawed and imperfect and enough, exactly as I was. The silence that had spread through their house when I canceled that mortgage payment had eventually filled with something better than the cinnamon-scented performance of perfect family life. It had filled with honest conversation, real connection, authentic love. And that was worth more than all the mortgage payments in the world, more than any amount of money could ever buy. As darkness fell and stars began to appear, I thought about the year ahead. Sophie starting first grade, James growing from toddler to little boy, David and Jennifer continuing to build their life together, independent and strong. Ruth visiting in the summer, Mrs. Patterson's constant friendship, Karen and Bill becoming true family rather than just in-laws. My retirement stretching ahead with possibilities I was only beginning to explore. The future looked bright, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. Real relationships, real love, real family built on foundations that would last. I'd stopped being their safety net, and in doing so, I'd taught them to fly. And I'd learned to fly too, discovering that I was so much more than what I could give financially. I went inside, locked the door, turned off the lights except for the small lamp I kept burning in the living room. In my bedroom, I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, went through the familiar rituals of bedtime. In the mirror, I caught my reflection and smiled at the woman looking back. She'd been through fire and come out refined, tested, and proven strong. She'd risked everything for the possibility of something better, and she'd won. Not a perfect victory, but a real one. The framed check on my dresser caught the lamplight, David's handwriting a reminder of how far we'd all come. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but tonight, everything was exactly as it should be. Tonight, I could rest in the peace of a job well done. The final truth settled over me like a warm blanket as I climbed into bed. Family isn't about what you can do for each other financially. It's not about mortgages paid or gifts given or money loaned. Family is about showing up, being present, loving each other enough to be honest even when honesty is hard. It's about boundaries respected and reciprocity maintained and effort that flows both ways. It's about valuing people for who they are, not what they can provide. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, through pain and separation and difficult choices. But I'd learned it thoroughly, permanently, in a way that would shape the rest of my life. And I'd taught it to my son, my daughter-in-law, and eventually my grandchildren, who would grow up understanding that love and money are separate things. As sleep pulled me under, my last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for the text message that had shattered my illusions. Gratitude for the strength to cancel that payment. Gratitude for Ruth's support and Mrs. Patterson's wisdom and Karen's unexpected alliance. Gratitude for David's willingness to grow and Jennifer's eventual honesty and Sophie and James's innocent love. Gratitude for the journey that had brought me here to this moment of hard-won peace. The mortgage I'd turned off had turned on something far more valuable, illuminating the path to authentic relationship, teaching us all what really mattered. And what mattered wasn't the house they lived in or the lifestyle they maintained. What mattered was the love we shared, freely given and gratefully received, worth more than any amount of money could ever be. That was the real gift, the true inheritance I'd leave my grandchildren someday. Not money, but wisdom. Not financial support, but unconditional love that knew when to hold on and when to let go.